Influencers, where we bring you the people that influence our communities, our neighborhoods, and our state. Today is no different. We have Steve Wolfson, District Attorney. How are you today?
Today's a great day, Peter. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, no, thank you for always allowing us to have access, which I think is important to the community that I represent. With that, tell us a little bit about you, your family.
Well, I moved here a little over 40 years ago. I started my legal career in the Clark County DA's office, the same office that I now manage. I've been a lawyer for the whole 40 years, started my career as a young prosecutor. Then I went into the private sector and I was a private criminal defense lawyer for 25 years. But about 18 years ago, I got the itch to get into public service, so I ran for the Las Vegas City Council, was fortunate enough to win that seat. And then 10 years ago, the opportunity came up for me to be the district attorney, and I was fortunate enough again for the Clark County Commission to appoint me, and I've been the DA for about 10 years. Happily married for 37 years to retired Judge Jackie Glass, and I have two older daughters, Rachel and Rebecca.
Excellent, excellent. So let's get right into it. I know you got a tough job, but we want our community to know a little more about your job and who you are. From a law enforcement perspective, describe your business experience and the most difficult issue or issues you saw business owners face during this pandemic.
Well, the pandemic affected all of us, Peter. I mean, some of us lost loved ones, some of us lost our jobs, some of us had to stay home because the children were out of school. And the criminal justice community was affected as well. Criminals didn't stop committing crimes, so the criminal justice system kept going even during the pandemic. So that was one of the biggest challenges, was that when we were out of school and out of work, still prosecuting cases. But I'm very proud of the work that my employees have done over the last couple of years. Small businesses are the lifeblood of any community, and especially here in Las Vegas. So we're particularly sensitive to the small business owner and their needs.
Excellent. And tell us, what are your top 3 priorities in dealing with the challenges of this community from a crime law enforcement perspective?
Well, public safety has always been my number one priority. People want to feel safe. When people go shopping at supermarkets or go to the parks to be with their children, they want to feel safe. So public safety has always been and will always be my number one priority. Now, what does that mean? It means the prosecution of violent and repeat offenders. That's our focus, because that's how we feel safer in the community, if the people who are committing violent crimes or the people that commit repeated crimes are prosecuted. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we're not sensitive to the needs of the low-level, non-violent offenders. And that's why we have specialty courts to meet the needs of a lot of people that have addictions, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, a gambling addiction, mental health, which affects so many of us in this community. So we bring a balance to the criminal justice community. We're tough on the ones that we need to be tough on, but we're receptive to the needs of people that can be rehabilitated and that maybe make mistakes in life.
Yeah. And switching gears to the Latino Hispanic community, how will you engage with the Hispanic community to make sure that, safety is such a high priority list on everybody's list, in the Hispanic community especially? How will you engage with Latinos?
Well, in a number of ways. I'm a member of the Multicultural Advisory Committee, like yourself, which meets once a month with community leaders from all walks of life: the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Asian community, and others as well, to hear what's going on in the various communities. Number 2, town halls. I used to do a lot of town halls, which I really like, because it's getting out into the neighborhoods, getting out into the communities. I learned so much by asking questions and having the people ask me questions. So it's a continuing dialogue. Number 3, I literally have an open door policy. I've never said no to anybody that wants to come in and talk to me, and I do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I happen to know that for a fact, because I've had to go in a couple times and got right in to talk about somebody on behalf of my community. So I definitely believe that transparency and accessibility is very important, especially to the Hispanic community. Let me ask you this. Our members of this Latin Chamber of Commerce are very concerned with crime. Crime does affect business. It's just that simple. Why should they trust you?
I think they should trust me, Peter, because I bring a number of characteristics to the job. Now more than ever, we need strong leadership and we need balanced experience. You know, I was a defense lawyer. I represented individual people, a lot of Hispanic people. And now I'm a prosecutor, so I take cases to court on behalf of victims of crimes. And many Latinos are victims of crimes. So I bring that balance to the community, to the job, I should say. In addition, I bring good judgment. I make decisions almost daily on very important cases. And I think having the proper judgment and exercising good judgment is what's needed now more than ever.
So, do you really believe that the minority communities get fair justice?
I think generally speaking, the answer is yes, but there are exceptions to that rule. If you would have asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have said that our public defender's office, which represents people that can't afford lawyers, we're not doing a very good job. And that is the indigent community, the people, a lot of Latinos, a lot of African Americans that can't afford lawyers that had to go to the public defender's office. And 20 years ago, I don't think they were getting very good representation. But that's changed. We have a very good public defender's office now that I think does as good a job as private lawyers. But I will say this. I have 7 lawyers that 7 days a week review 250 cases a day. They don't have time to look at the name or the ethnicity of somebody that they're reviewing. So I don't think there is disparity in our charging. We charge a lot of wealthy people with crimes. We charge famous people with crimes. It makes no difference.
Yeah. And I appreciate that because sometimes we explain to these folks just what you said, that we're not quite sure people are just homering in on last names. There's just no time for that.
They don't have time to look at the names.
No time.
Let me say one other thing. A few years ago, the Department of Motor Vehicles chief came to me because the legislature passed the new law about driver's identification cards. And they wanted to know if I would agree to not prosecute people, primarily Latinos, who had previously obtained a driver's license with forged documents. And now the law was encouraging them to come in and get ID cards. I said, and I agreed, absolutely, we're not going to prosecute these people. We want to encourage people to follow the law and come in and get these identification cards. So that's something significant I did, in particular for the Latino community.
Yeah, I remember those days. So, it's interesting. We've asked the Latino community about the death penalty, and the majority seem to, at least in our membership, be for the death penalty as long as it's fair, right? As long as every avenue has been explored. How do you feel about the death penalty?
Well, the death penalty is a very controversial issue, but most of the states still have it on their books, including Nevada. But I have cut the number of death penalty cases by more than 1/2 since I took over 10 years ago. I believe it should be reserved for the very worst of the worst cases. And let me give you an example. The 1 October mass shooting, where 60 people died, 58 that night and 2 others later on. If that killer hadn't committed suicide that night, I would be personally prosecuting that person and seeking the death penalty, because that's an extraordinary case. And we have other cases like that, where 3 or 4 people are killed, or children are tortured and locked in freezers, cases like that, where I think the jury should have the option. Remember, the district attorney, when we ask for the death penalty, we don't impose the death penalty, we give it as an option to a jury.
Right.
So it's always the jury that decides whether or not to impose the death penalty. And I'll end on this subject with this. It is not a perfect system. We have people that have been on death row for decades. And I think that's where the frustration is. I think if you ask most people, they're not generally against the death penalty. Some people for religious or moral reasons are, and I get that. Most people are against the process because it takes so long. It's very, very frustrating.
Steve, lately there's been quite a few high-profile DUI cases. Is it fair to say that DUI is on the rise, or is it just that now the media is more focused on it and there's so much access?
Well, I think that the number of DUIs actually has increased over the last couple of years, and I think the pandemic is one of the biggest factors. A lot of people were out of work. The consumption of alcohol was on the rise. But the number of DUI cases isn't that much greater. It's the number of the serious cases. We've had some terrible, terrible cases where people have been speeding in excess of 120, 130 miles an hour while under the influence of alcohol, or reckless driving. Even if there's no alcohol involved, they're driving 90 miles an hour, killing whole groups of people, whole families of people. And that is why the traffic fatality cases are one of my top priorities, always has been. And we seek stiff penalties for the violators, no matter who they are.
Steve, let me ask you one final question. What makes you qualified for this position?
Well, like I said before, I have leadership experience. I've done the job for 10 years. I was a city councilman. I've handled large budgets as a city councilman. I have a $65 million budget. I manage 700 people, 170 lawyers. So I think the leadership and experience is needed now more than ever. But again, good judgment. I think good judgment, because I have to make serious decisions on so many important issues. And I have very good people that I surround myself with to seek input from. So now more than ever, we're at a critical stage. I don't want Nevada to become what California has become. I am not that kind of lead prosecutor. I believe in law and order, but I also believe in fairness and justice.
Steve, I know we have some big cases that are under investigation right now, pending, that we can't talk about today. But do you commit to come back and always talk to the Latino community through our chamber?
I'll come back tomorrow if you like, Peter, or any day you invite me. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Influencers, where we bring you the folks that truly influence our day-to-day life. And today was no different. Thank you, District Attorney Steve Wolfson, for joining us. And until we see you again on the next episode of Influencers.